Hey. Where's all lovely?
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to HIPAA again and again, and welcome for the new faces here. We will have today a special lecture, and we hope this will take us and encourage us to travel abroad. We will have today our lecturer, Bjoern Lauen.
Hello,
And
everyone.
we will have about 3 hours lecture. Please, if you want to share the live streaming link for the people or your friends who couldn't make it to come today, please do it. It will be shared on our social media. And if you go to HIPAA channel on YouTube, you can share the live streaming link. We will have, as I told you, about 3 hours lecture, and we will have 15 minutes break in between. If you wish to pray, ladies, please pray in the room next to the reception. And for gents, please proceed to the ground floor. There is a special prayer room. Thank you very much. And don't forget to take your certificates at the end of the lecture. Thank you and enjoy. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? Good. So, if you're as excited about travel as I am, then that's definitely a good thing. I've started photography when I was probably a teen. I was given a camera and started fiddling around with it. I then interned at a newspaper. I interned at a photo studio. The beard is gone. I'm sorry. But yeah, but very short. I interned at a newspaper, so I learned photography on film, actually, 35 mil with a darkroom and proper developing and clipping them up and using like a cardboard card to feather and bring out details. And then my career developed differently. I've worked corporate for many years and found that that's not really my thing, and decided to go back to creativity. So now I'm a commercial photographer. I'm the managing director of a film production and publishing company in Dubai. So I've stayed in the creative field, and whenever I have time, I travel. And over the years, I've traveled on assignment for publications. I've traveled for myself. I've traveled for photo books and other assignments, and often for charity organizations that I work with or that worked with me and were nice enough to bring me into interesting places. One of, can everyone hear me? Even at the, can you guys hear me? Good? Perfect. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk you through a few things, travel photography. I will definitely show you some pictures and be keen to know what you think. But I'm also going to look at, so how do you travel with gear? Because one thing, especially everyone thought with digital photography, the gear would become smaller and smaller. My backpack is still as full, if not more, because you have lenses, you have the body, you have filters, you have this and that. So one thing I learned over the years is how to travel with really, really compact backpacks and really compact cases. One thing for travel photography I always found when I started out was, okay, so how do you do this? Like, you go to a different place, you have no idea of what's happening there. You don't know the people, you don't know the culture, and that's the whole idea of it, right? You want to get out of your comfort zone. You want to do something that's not looking the same as it looks outside your front door. But then the question is like, okay, how do I get those pictures? Like, where do I go? What do I photograph? Like, where to start? And the reason why I quoted Arthur Felick, New York-based photographer, was very popular. He was once asked, so how do you always, like, he's a news photographer, but he was asked, like, how do you always get those sharp frames? Like, how do you always be, like, right there? And his answer was very simple. At the time, analog photography, it was F8 and be there. That was a very short answer. I'm sure a lot of you know that quote. It's pretty popular. But it still applies today. Like, you want to make sure you can take the picture when it happens. Travel photography is a bit of a weird animal. It's kind of similar to street photography, but happens outside of the known areas where you feel comfortable. It combines certain elements of landscape, you have people, you have certain sites that you only have here, right? I mean, one of the sites is right behind us, Burj Khalifa. I live around the area, and when we go outside for a walk at night, you cannot believe how many people have their nose on the floor just to make sure they get, like, the entire tower. There's the fountain, you know, you have those things in different countries. You go to Paris, in Paris you have the Eiffel Tower. So it combines those elements of street, landscape, sites, and then you have very unique elements of certain countries, right? Who of you is from Dubai? Like, who lives in Dubai? Okay, so the majority of you. So who knows Bastakia? Okay, not as many as I thought. So Bastakia is what some would say the old Dubai, right? So you have really nice old houses with wind towers, and it has a really nice feel. A lot of tourists, luckily now, venture down there more and more, but when I came to Dubai like 15 years ago, tourists wouldn't go to Bastakia. There was no reason to, right? They would walk along the creek, but they wouldn't go to Bastakia. So there's those elements that are very specific to a city or a country. And one way of finding your way to cities, and I've compiled a few 101s that we're going to get through during the next couple of hours, is to plan, right? So planning your trip to make sure you get the most out of travel. Air travel is as cheap as it has never been, right? We can fly almost anywhere for below $1,000, which is still a lot of money, but you can fly, if you save money, you can fly anywhere. That used to be very different 20 years ago, right? So, but still, because you're investing money, you want to plan it well, right? And I've compiled like a sort of planning elements, and we can go through them together and see what we make out of it. So one is select your equipment really based on what you need while traveling. There's absolutely no need for a 15 lenses kit if you go and make a city trip, right? You would need a wide angle, so for example a 16-35. You would need a telephoto, ideally a 70-200. You would probably need a filler in the middle, 24-70, right? And if you like, you can probably take a prime, you know, for street photography, 35mm, or if you're after portraits, an 80 or 85mm lens. So, but even then, you already have 5 lenses, so they have to go somewhere, right? Then you have your camera body. Now you're traveling, so do you take a second body, you know, just in case something happens? Okay, so now you have 2 bodies and 5 lenses. Then if you're after landscape, you're going to take filters, right? You need to take a tripod, exactly. So now you have a bag with 5 lenses, 2 bodies, a deck of filters. You probably also want to have flash, you know, so you have at least 1 flash, maybe a little bounce, you know, just because it fits so nicely. And you have a tripod hanging down your tripod, and then you also need clothes while traveling. So you have another suitcase. So I've found over the years that I've actively went and reduced my kit to the minimum. So what do I really need? So often I travel with 1 body, 2 lenses, and that's it. You know, that limits you to a certain extent. But what I do ahead of the trip is I really think, what do I want to do, right? So I decide okay, is this going to be a city trip? Or is this going to be a purely photography trip? Is that a holiday? Do I combine both? Never works, by the way. Or what is this for? And then based on this, I select what I take with. We do a lot of Nepal trips, and who knows me or who doesn't is I love riding bikes, which comes with a bit of a problem. You don't have a trunk. So I have to fit my kit on top of a duffel bag with my shirts. I can see you know what I'm talking about. So it becomes a bit of a challenge, but it's so cool because you can really compress your stuff, and it makes you have to think before you leave. So one thing I found is that when you look at the resources you have today, online and offline, you can gather so much information before you actually leave that it really makes you feel comfortable. You can look at what have other people photographed. Use Instagram, Tumblr, so many Facebook, you know, you have so many resources to find out what have other people photographed. What's unique in the country, you know? What is interesting? Is there festivals? Is there any events? Nepal, for example, one of the countries that apparently has a festival every second week. There's something happening, so you can time it, and it happens long in advance. Most events in cities or countries happen very long in advance, so you can actually plan quite well. And depending on that, you can then choose your kit, and you will find that half of the time, if you travel with all your gear, what are you going to lose? One body, one lens. That usually is it. Except if you go and say, okay, I want to shoot this, and you know exactly, okay, for this, I need a wide angle. For this, I need a telephoto. Different story. But so that's one thing. As funny as it sounds, I always check, how's the weather? You know? Might be great. Usually in September, except that first week of September when you're going and it's raining cats and dogs, or it's snowing, or they had a temperature fall and it's like -5 degrees. But that can be a benefit, but it can also be really not that great if you're planning to do a cycling trip along a river, or, you know, intended to shoot mountain tops, mountain peaks somewhere. So that's another thing I always look at. Like, except if it's like really something that you can't avoid, Eiffel Tower, Burj Khalifa, you know, stuff you just want to have to look at. But other things that have been photographed, try to be a bit more creative. And then local know-how to me is the best resource you can have. Speak when you're there, you've planned your trip, so you know when you're going to be where, you know what times you're going to be where, right? Another thing that I forgot to mention earlier is you need to know when you're going to be where, because there's two constants that all of us have no influence on, and that's when the sun sets and when the sun rises. And those two we cannot change, right? So if you're in this amazing location for one night at a hotel, but you're arriving at 9 at night, and sundown would have been amazing on this mountainside, then you missed out on that. So really go and make like a schedule of when are you going to be where, what time do I arrive at the hotel, and then see what's around. Like, can I reach, if I arrive at 4 and sunset is at 6, can I reach it? That's why I said usually holiday and photography together, for me, never works. You will have an angry wife, you will be upset, and angry children. You will be upset because you don't get the shot. It never really works. The only way it works for me is if you say, okay, those 3 days on a 7-day holiday, those 4 days are beach and city and whatnot, and 3 days is purely photography. That works. Don't try to combine it. It's destined for disaster. Local know-how is really something that you can rely on. Try finding people, because the people live there, right? If I would come to you and say, okay, where's a great spot to have a good shot of the creek? You would probably know a place, right? At Dubai Creek. Okay. If you ask someone in my city, they would be able to spot you a right spot for a great shot of one of the sites that are in my town, right? So we know our towns best. So rely on local knowledge and really approach people. You'd be surprised. You're going to see a photo later that I've shot on a quick trip to Fujairah, and we got in touch with this older gentleman, older fisherman, and he was so lovely. He had the greatest fun with us. We had the greatest fun with him, and he showed us like areas of Fujairah that I would have never even found spending a week in Fujairah, because they know their area. And we tend to think, yeah, why would they share that with us? Because other photographers never share with us, but they're not photographers. They're quite happy to show you their favorite sundown spot that they've been sitting on a rock for the last 20 years, you know? They're happy to share that's really good place for food, where you can try local dishes and see local things. And that's another local know-how tip. If you want to have good food in a town, in a city, it doesn't matter where you are, it applies to everywhere in the world, go where taxi drivers go. Because they're driving for 12, 14 hours. If you want to have good food, those guys have good food. It always works. And another thing happens at places where taxi drivers go, you literally have the combined knowledge of the hotspots of the town. Taxi drivers are better than radio. They know everything that happens when and where. So you can really rely on those guys. And then sit down in an evening, have a good dinner, and then go through your list and say, okay, this is what we planned as the schedule, right? This is the schedule we had when we left home. This is what we want to do. This is what we have now. We have local information that we can work with, and make a little production schedule, you know? That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to say, okay, if you're spending somewhere 10 days, break it down. Do the things that you can plan, that you really want to go to, and then take a few days just losing yourself in the city, or in that village, or in that mountain area. Like, you just go and venture out, and you will come across interesting things that you would have otherwise not noticed. You know, the whole idea is to take your focus away from everything else and just submerge into this world that you're not used to. And quoting someone else famous, as Oscar Wilde said, be yourself, because everyone else is taken. So the idea of running after the shot that you saw somewhere on Instagram or somewhere on a website or somewhere in a magazine, you want to replicate that shot, except if it's to try your technical know-how on photography, there's no point, right? Just promise I didn't shoot that flickering. So be yourself, create your own images, you know, find your own little spots, and it doesn't always have to be grand, you know. What matters for travel photography is that you go home and you sit in front of that image and think, cool, that's a good shot. Now, photographers looking at their own images thinking it's a good shot, that's a completely different story, but try showing it to people that you like, or that preferably like you, and see what they say. That's the idea, right? You want to take something from that country, and you want to capture those moments and take them home. That's why you're going in the first place. And don't forget, with all that photography, you submerge yourself in that culture. And I'm going to show you a few images of different areas and different cultures that I've traveled to over the last probably 2 years, 3 years, and we can look at images together. And one thing that I'm really happy to do is to take questions. You know, let's make this a workshop, a lecture, more of a workshop than a lecture. You know? So feel free to pop a question anytime. If you're not comfortable in English, you can ask in Arabic. We have someone to translate. You know, any other language, I'm sure we will find a way. So let's make this like a collective, nice 3 hours. You know? And 100% sure you can learn something from me, but I'm also sure I can learn something from you. So pop a question over whenever you feel like. A question that I always get after lectures or speeches is like, what camera do I use? Like, what's the best camera to buy? I have no idea. I've taken amazing images on those little things, where I always wonder why I carry around 20 kilos of gear if I have like literally 200 grams in my pocket that deliver a 12 megapixel image, and I print them and they look amazing on my wall. I've taken amazing images with medium format bodies. I've taken amazing images with the Sony I use. What matters is that you have it with you when something happens. So that's definitely one point. So, and you need to be ready, right? Like, if you take time off photographing and you walk around the city or go to work, you obviously don't have a camera. But if you do a city trip or if you spend the weekend, you know, just the camera bodies are now so small. Whatever camera you own, just take it with. Chuck it in a handbag or have it around the shoulder. There's always stuff happening, and it's with everything. Like with everything, as more comfortable you get with your gear, as more often you use it, it almost becomes like muscle memory. Now you know in your sleep, where is the auto setting? Where's manual? Where's shutter priority? Where's aperture priority? How do I change ISO? It becomes muscle memory. And if something happens that you want to capture, you're going to be a lot quicker. But if you have to stand there and go, okay, how about, well, hang on, just, yeah? It's not going to, nothing's going to wait for you. It's just going to disappear. So that's one thing, you know, like really be ready. And I know it sounds simple, but really be aware what happens around you. You know, we're so immersed in our day-to-day life. You know, I walked over here to HIPAA, and I saw like at least 10 people after work going, okay, no. They didn't even realize I was there. They didn't realize there was any traffic around them. If there wouldn't be traffic signals, half of the population wouldn't exist anymore because they would constantly run in front of taxis. So be aware of what's happening around you. Try to look at weather. You know, I was super excited yesterday. There were thunderstorms forecasted. I was like, ooh, I was already thinking, where do I go? What do I do? Yeah, that didn't happen, but okay. You know, but be aware of things around you. You know? And you will see through a lot of images that we're going to see through the course of the session, a lot of them were just me being aware of something happening. And you can train your eye. You can train your eye to be aware of those little moments. Like I said, this is how the photo bag can look when I travel. I'm going to show you later how it looks now. So this is how my kit usually looks. Who of you photographs with lights, with flashlights, speed lights, constant lights, hot lights? Sometimes, okay? That's very little. So most of you photograph without light, right? Ambient light. You photograph with lights as well? Okay. So this you will potentially recognize. They're Profoto B2s. They're really compact little 250-watt lights. You can chuck them in a bag. They come with a little battery pack here. I used to have one of those in the bag, Joby, to travel. I got so annoyed by this little snaky kind of thing to never be straight that I've now changed it against something you're going to see later. Camera body, I love this little thing. It's a Pelicase SD card case. You can drive a truck on it. You can go dive with it. You can do anything with it. You can throw it in the desert, and your card's going to be as clean as you put them in. Deck of lenses. I shoot Sony, as you probably can see by that. I have shot Nikon before, so I still use some of my Nikon lenses. I use some Canon lenses. I have something called the Metabone, which basically It's like an adapter that you put on the Sony, and then you connect any other lens to it, right? You need one adapter for one manufacturer. So I have one for Canon, I have one for Nikon, and you basically turn the Sony into a camera that accepts the different lens mount, but it also works with the autofocus and metering flawlessly. This little thing, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it folded open. This little thing is basically a gray card. The company's called Polarizer, I think, and you can fold it open and you have a gray card. Do you know what a gray card is for? Who knows what a gray card is for? White balance, okay. So who can explain me how white balance works? No hands? That's sad for so many photographers. Go ahead. Exactly, right on. Perfect. So I say the same thing to everybody again. Perfect, right on. That was exactly it. So the camera is a digital sensor, right? The camera doesn't know what's green, what's red, what's pink, what's yellow. The only thing the camera knows is what's gray, right? So the camera knows what's neutral gray. But now if you're here, neutral gray looks different than it would look outside, right? So when you look at your camera, most of you probably shoot in auto white balance, right? So the camera looks at what it sees and tries to find what gray is, right? Sometimes you get lucky. Cameras are very advanced now. They have a very good spot on what the color is. But sometimes you also don't get that lucky. That's mostly in situations where you have a lot of different lights, so yellow, blue, pink. Then you have gray and blacks. It's in situations where there isn't a lot of light, so sunrise, sunset, blue hour, golden hour, where there's light is not that present. So this little thing here basically has a neutral gray card on it. It's a little gray card. That fold it open. You take a picture, and now the camera knows, okay, this picture is gray. Even if you don't set it in the camera, you can go home. If you shoot, who of you shoots JPEG, who shoots RAW? RAW? Okay. JPEG? Okay. So if you shoot RAW, you can change the white balance setting later on, because the camera doesn't record white balance. It records everything it sees, and later on you can go and adjust it, right? So here you take this little thing, keep the image, go back home, you edit in whatever software you edit with, and you use that as a reference. Say, okay, this is great. That applies to to the light situation in that moment. Now, if you go leave the park and you go somewhere in the city, that changes it, right? So whenever you change your location, you would have to do a new gray balance. But it's really helpful because you can tick that box off your mind and go, okay, I have a gray balance value, and you can take that home. For digital publishing, whenever you use it, like on social, on your website, or just to show your friends on the iPad or the computer, it doesn't really matter that much. Where it really matters is when you start printing, because then you need to know what is gray and how do the other colors build around it. Because only then your blues, your greens, your yellows will look the way they're supposed to look. So that's how the kit used to look. And I don't want to bore you with too much of gray balance, but I'm going to show you a few images from Nepal. Sure. This? This is the power adapter for the Profoto B2s. So it basically it's probably this big. It packs a battery at the bottom, and you can plug in those two plugs. You can plug in those two heads and release it with the remote. So you have basically two normal flash heads. The power bank is actually here. Actually, good question. No, you can't, because only two plugs it has is this and a 3.5 main in. Who of you has been to Nepal? Okay. So Nepal is around four hours flight from here. Is home to the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. It's is home to the highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, and you have an area called Mustang, which is up in the north of Nepal, which used to be and still is a kingdom, but it used to be completely sealed off. You weren't able to access it and get into, and even today you can only get in with special permits. Now, all the images you're going to see during the concourse of this lecture, and I've selected them on purpose, are not retouched. There's no, they have color correction, they have exposure, contrast, and white balance. They might have a vignette, so basically where you sort of pretend that the outside of the image is a little darker than the inside. It creates a bit of a dramatic effect. There is nothing that has been added or removed, because one thing I wanted to show you in travel photography is that photographers of other categories usually spend a long time editing their images, you know, especially if you look at fashion photographers, portrait photographers. There's a lot of retouching that's involved in those segments, and that's rightly so, right? That's part of that section. The photos I wanted to show you is they're shot as what happened. Like this mountain, if you go there or if you would have been next to me, this looked exactly as it looks now. So all the images you're going to see are not retouched. One thing that's really important to me as someone who travels and someone who really enjoys people is respect. One thing that in this region is a very important element of day-to-day culture, right? In other countries, that might be different, but what I would always do when traveling is I would respect the people the same way, like they would come to my house and I would want them to behave in my house, right? If you do that, what I've found over the years is I'm the same way as I am when I have guests, right? I do not travel photography, and I have this challenge with myself all the time is, do I stage images or not? You know, and whoever of you that follows photography when it comes to travel and reportage, over the last year, there was one particular photographer who had to deal with a lot of havoc coming his way for editing images that he took in Afghanistan and in other countries in the world that were edited heavily, and it was a big conversation, right? And that they were staged, right? There's an image of a woman next to a train, and it looks amazing, but it turned out it was basically a friend's wife who he put next to a train with like cases. And still a photographer I admire very much, but you know, there was this whole conversation of, for travel and street, can you stage? None of the images you're going to see are staged, which makes life a lot harder for me because you rely on moments that happen or not. I've come back from travel with literally a 16 GB card full of absolutely nothing usable. And I've come back from trips where I had to swap cards so often because there was always something happening, right? But nothing that you will see is staged. And one thing that brings with is that I feel like approaching people to ask them to take a picture is the right way forward, because you're gonna be me just coming up to you and sticking a 50mm lens in your face, right? So we're engaging with people, and you know, when you look around here, we probably have 10 and more nationalities in one room. We all have a different perception of how we interact with people. But in one thing we can all agree. Just blindly going to you taking a picture makes none of us feel comfortable, right? So sometimes you take a picture before because a moment happens. We all have LCD screens at the back of the camera. There's nothing holding us back saying, sir, I've taken this picture of you, but we've taken that picture of you. Is that okay that I took that picture of you? And you can decide, right? And the other thing is you have to accept that someone might say, no, I'm not comfortable with that. We all know that there is regions where taking pictures of people is a bit more challenging than others, right? But that's how it is, and we have to respect that. And that's one thing I've always made a case for, even in this region, people think you cannot photograph women, okay? If I approach you and say, this just looks lovely, can I take your picture, would you mind? See, you would say yes or you would say no, but it's your choice, right? The problem is when you go and take a picture and people feel like you've taken something away from them. There's cultures in the South Pacific and in the South American jungles that believe to this day, there's some African cultures that believe the same, that you're taking their soul if you take their picture. Who wants that? I mean, you've got to be careful with that. So just approach people and say, okay, can I take your picture? And I've experienced no's, where people say, no, I don't want to have my picture taken. I have women, even in this region, that said, yes, of course, no problem. But I've never had a bad response. I've never had an aggressive response. Because ultimately you have a right to your own picture, and it's only fair to ask, right? Like I said, sometimes it's after the fact because a moment happened and you can show it. But this, for me, applies wherever you go, and I've always had great experiences with it. Now, some of you might think, oh, great, if I travel to a country where I don't speak the language, how do I communicate with people? Okay? You can always go and say, okay, is this okay? You know? Yeah? Big smile? You can communicate with everyone, right? We do have those skills. So this, for example, is one of those moments, and we start this little Nepal journey in Kathmandu. This is one of those journeys, and on this trip, I found myself photographing those little stores, and they were kind of cool scenes of people just living their day-to-day life, right? And I wanted to capture that. So this is a very typical Nepali cap that you will see men wearing all the time. This is a souvenir store, and you can see there's a lot of different devotionalia, different items from Nepal. And this guy was just sitting in front of the shop and probably thinking, oh, God damn it, it's not 6 yet, I want to go home. And you find those moments in cities quite often. You can see that the next couple of images are all going to be black and white. That, again, is one thing that you will have to decide when you travel and when you look at things. Some images just look better in color, I feel, and other images are stronger in black and white. Some people say, any image looks good in black and white. It's not true. Black and white needs a lot more contrast and exposure balance. You need light and dark elements to be somewhat balanced. If you just blindly convert any color image into black and white, it's not necessarily going to look good. So like I said, there's going to be other images. I think that shirt is a little tight, but I admire the beard skills. You know, this also just happened. It's a moment where I walked by and I looked down in my periphery vision, looking down this alley, and I saw this guy. I was like, this is just too good not to photograph. And I actually went and showed him. And he laughed because he knows he has a big belly, you know? I mean, I don't think this is a six-pack. So, you know, exactly, it's more a barrel. This guy is long ahead of me, though. And he looked at the picture and he laughed and he thought it was funny, you know? I mean, he enjoyed it. And I moved on and he kept sitting there. But we had like this little exchange. And I had moments where I photographed, particularly in Africa, where you photograph one child and you show him the picture, and seconds later you find yourself surrounded by 30, 40 children. Like, what the heck is happening? And everyone wants to see your picture, right? So you also, when you travel, you have a mission. You're this person from abroad, right? Don't forget that people who see you the first time, this is how they think everyone is where you're from, right? So you're like an ambassador for wherever you're from, right? Because that's how people perceive you. And especially as more remote areas become, as less contact do people have in like a mountain area in Afghanistan or Nepal or Pakistan. They don't have the contact with outside people. So they think once you stick your nose in there, everyone in a polo shirt from, where are you from? From Syria is going to be like you. This is their picture, you know? So if you're nice, people be like, oh, the people from Syria are cool. We had this dude coming to the village. He was really nice. That's a lot better than people saying, oh, Syrians in polo shirts, you know, it wasn't so great last time. So it sounds so silly, but it's really, really, really making an impact. And especially because we're all from different parts of the world and we all travel, it really makes an impact. You can see I continued my little shopkeeper session there, and you want to try, like in street photography, you want to try to capture those moments where people are just themselves, you know? I had a very funny conversation a couple of years ago with a photographer who came here and photographed streets in New York. He said, you know, have you ever noticed how many people sit in cars in the morning, fresh out of the bathroom, trying to fix their nose hair or like get that little bit of dirt off their ear, because you have this little cocoon, exactly where, like, no one expects you, like, you don't expect anyone to see you. You're surrounded by glass. I mean, but you want to capture those moments where people think no one watches, because that's when we're all the most human. And we're quite funny creatures, you know, we do funny stuff. This woman was playing, I'm not sure if you can see it, she had like a piece of shell of a nut in her mouth, and her mission that day seems to have been to roll it as often as she could. She was flipping and rolling it all the time. So we were just like snuck in a corner taking that picture. Talking of lenses, as you can see with the previous shot as well, I'll show you again. Or maybe not. So you can see the background here is what photographers call compressed. So that the image is compressed and you have quite a shallow depth of field. You can see the background still relatively sharp, but it starts blurring, right? Which gives your image more depth. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but by blurring the background, you separate the subject better from the background. So you give your image more depth. And that you can only achieve either of long lenses. So like a 70-200, for example, is like one of the known focal lengths to do that. That's why it's such a popular lens for a lot of purposes. Or like an 85 or 100 mil, right? You can start compressing, but you can also stop down to 2.8 and create this really nice shallow depth of field. So traveling, if you're thinking of doing portraits, that's always a good lens to have, like a nice 80 millimeter, because you can also start blurring stuff in the foreground, and you just create a bit more of an atmospheric image. This is what happens if you don't use good skincare. There's a lot of wrinkles here, but that's what made it so interesting. So this woman was sitting on a staircase at one of the sites in Kathmandu city. And we walked by, and I looked at this face, and she had this glow and glare in her eyes, and this face was just so impressive. And like I said, the images you see, except if I make a point of telling, okay, this was shot with light, all the images are shot with ambient light, right? So this is how the light looked. You had like a shadow here, and like I said, I didn't retouch it because I could have gone and said, okay, well, this area here, I could have just adjusted it to the same skin tone, right? But this is how the light looked. It was just a shadow on her face, and there was a bit of light, and this is how it turned out. You can see here, it's like more light than there. For me, that's what made the image authentic in that moment. I'm not trying to be a fashion photographer, you know, and travel is a different story. I try to avoid people looking into the camera because for me it feels a bit too staged, and like I said, I always have a bit of a battle with myself whether staging images is a good thing or not. I try to avoid it. What I like though is if people are just like in that moment of looking at you. Not yet looking at you, but in that moment of realizing you're there. So this is what happened here. I'm actually sitting on like a little concrete thingy, and he turned around looking at me right when I took that shot. This, by the way, is a Tibetan pilgrim. Nepal is home to the biggest displaced Tibetan population in the world, and they have the biggest Tibetan refugee camp outside Tibet. The second biggest is in India, and those guys, for now almost 2 generations, are based there. One of the biggest temples is there, and they walk around in the traditional attire that they used to wear and still wear in Tibet. So another local tip is in Nepal, you can get like typical Nepal, but you can also get Tibetan, yeah, in a certain area. So they all have like really interesting faces that have a bit more of Mongolian influence. And you can sit there, I promise you sit there for like a day. You come, if you want to shoot faces, you're going to come back with so many different kind of faces. It's impressive. And they're all dressed really nicely. They all have what's also similar in this region, the prayer beads. They have something very similar. Not 99, different number, but like it's the same concept. So they walk around the temple with their prayer beads. Looks pretty nice. Another thing in countries, we're all very, very lucky, right? We live in Dubai. We all live in fairly good conditions. We usually have food on the table, right? We have shelter. We don't have to be afraid of anything. We live in a great city. Not everyone is as lucky as us. And again, for me, traveling is one thing that you see a lot of things that don't happen in front of your house. You know, you see poverty, you see children malnourished, you see sick people, you see old people that no one takes care of. That's very sad, but what it does to me is it keeps me very grounded. Like I go back home to Dubai and I think, God damn it, am I lucky? You know, and you go back and you, I remember coming back from the first Africa trip we did, and it was, we did a couple of weeks, and I came back. We hadn't showered for 2 weeks, and we stayed at this hotel after the 2 weeks of not showering. I can tell you, you really appreciate a shower after 2 weeks. And I opened the tub, and not only you, but also the people around you. I opened the water tub, and we've been in really poor areas and remote areas. I opened the water tub, water running out of the tub, and I started crying. Because it was like, you know, you've just come from somewhere where people have to walk 15, 20 kilometers to carry water, to then cook, wash, bath, take care of the elders, and you're just standing there and turning open the tub. And, you know, Who of you leaves the water running while brushing their teeth? Oh, come on. I do. You know, that water running down the tap is basically a day of cooking for a family somewhere in Ethiopia or in other countries of the world. So, you know, that's what travel photography does. When you do it involved, you realize, oh, wait, you know, maybe that's something I should think of, you know? This woman is probably in her 70s. She was sitting there begging for money to look after herself for food, and she didn't look like she had a very good time. But it's an image that I take back and tell you about it, and even if you don't do anything about it, you're more aware of it, and you know it's happening somewhere, you know? And if the only thing I achieve after you're leaving this room thinking, you know, we're actually quite lucky, you know, maybe next time when we go, you notice things like this, then I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. That's why I'm taking images back, you know. And then there's nice moments, you know. You wonder, this guy sits there with his woolen blanket and traditional clothes. You can see the head again, and he has a really nice watch that looks completely, if you look closely at the image, looks completely out of place. It doesn't really fall into the image with like the wooden background and all very sort of traditional, but a nice watch, you know. So you get those moments. The gesture is very typical again for Nepal, which is namaste, which is loosely translates to, you know, my soul greets your soul, and it's a very sort of peaceful way of saying hello. And he didn't even look at us. He was just sitting there thinking away, and it was a really nice picture to take. Here you see the same gesture, you know, and you can try to capture those scenes. Maybe I should have been a little wider here. It kind of crops, and you can't see the context. But this is one of the rickshaw drivers in the town of Kathmandu, where you can get those guys for cheap and ride around town. Please, let me get you a microphone. Thank you so much. So everyone can hear you.
At what point do you decide if you're going to take the black and white capture? Were you aware at those moments that you're going to be taking black and white shots, or did you decide afterwards? Or
good question. Sometimes I do decide before. I can show you how it looks. This picture, I didn't think shooting black and white, and you can see it's quite overexposed here. It loses a lot of detail here. Even here, it's not deep enough. It doesn't have the same depth. Here, I decided to shoot black and white, and you can see it has a lot more balance. It's properly exposed across the frame. This, again, I didn't decide to shoot black and white. It was just a lucky shot, and you can see the difference. Like, you and I now talking about it, we can see the difference. This, again, was shot for black and white. This was definitely shot for black and white. So how I do it is, if I see a portrait, I usually try to shoot for black and white if in my head the outcome is going to be black and white. So I try to look at it. If it's if it's spontaneous, I tend to keep them color because they usually don't convert very well. But I try. You know, sometimes I just try and see. Okay, for me this would look better in black and white, and I try to convert it. What we've done on trips is I've done purposely shot portraits for black and white. So whatever I shoot, I knew I wanted to use for black and white.
So all these portraits were actually shot originally in black and white. None of them were converted. Okay, lovely.
Well, shooting in black and white, I still shoot raw, but what I do is I over or underexpose or exposure correct right there and then. So if I shoot in like a very bright environment, I tend to underexpose by one stop, and just to make sure it's balanced enough. And with, like, for example, the Sony I use, your dynamic range is so wide that you can recover easily 3-4 stops without any loss, and the other way as well. So, but I try then to underexpose, so I get a bit more balance.
Thank you.
Good question, though. Any other questions for the moment before I? Here you go. Good question again. So the question was, do I purposely cut the head in the frame, or do I not? If I remember correctly, that picture actually has the head at the top, and common belief was for many years that for portraits you do not cut the head, right? Okay, but as far as I know, rules are there to be broken when it comes to photography. So I know where you're coming from. Like, usually it's like the cleaner shot is like have the head, but for me, cutting the head here gives me a more dramatic, balanced image. Because if you look at the segregation and you go with rule of thirds, then this would be spot on at least 1 or 2 of the rule of thirds points. Even that rule you can break, you can shift it. But like for me, cropping and cutting the head off, right? But for travel and street, you can do what you please, and you're gonna see a few of those examples a little later. Thanks for the question. Any others?
Take the written approval, because you are not going to see them again. For street photographers, sometimes
Yeah, this is probably a subject for a 3-hour session. Image rights, right?
We can start with a simple question.
I keep it short. So, yes, I think internationally institutions agree that, and law agrees that you have the right to your image. I can tell you in Germany, for example, you lose that right when it's more than 5 people because it's considered a group and a public affair. But nevertheless, you have the right to your own image, right? If I take a picture of you now and you find it on cover of National Geographic tomorrow morning, you wouldn't be too happy. Nat Geo may be okay, fair enough. I do take model release forms if I think I might use them commercially. So I have a few images with an agency in London that turns them into fine art prints. Those images are all model released. This is not model released. You're going to see images later from Africa where it is model released by a fingerprint because they're illiterate, so some of the people there. I think if you intend to use them commercially, and commercially also means anything that you get paid for, right? So take an image and you do a workshop and you get paid for that workshop, then that's a commercial interest. So you would have to get a model release. And you'd be surprised, like people, there's amazing apps for the phone that you can sign with your finger. So you basically just go, okay, sorry, can you just, And a lot of people don't actually care because they're like, yeah, well, okay. I tell them what they're signing, so they're not thinking they're buying a washing machine, but I tell them, okay, this is, in case I use it in a book or I use it for anything, I'd want to make sure you're okay with that, and they sign. Yeah, it is legitimate, yeah. There's plenty. Just look for model release app, and you're gonna find a few different ones. Otherwise, what I do is I usually carry a few in my bag, English and Arabic in this region. So you get them signed, and I file them, and then if you ever want to print it, you're in the safe. And I think you pointed something out that's very important. There is a very fine line between photography being a hobby and photography being a business. So every answer you're going to get from me for those questions is going to be more on the business side, because I just can't afford that someone sues me for copyright infringement or infringement of their own image rights. So I have to make sure. But if you just have it on your tablet to look at it with family and friends, you don't need a model release, right? Except if you're in countries where taking pictures of people is illegal without written approval. And there is a few of those countries. Excellent question, though. Do you take model releases typically when you photograph? Okay, but if you would use them commercially, then it's not a big thing. Who of you takes model releases when photographing? Okay. Any other questions? Let me get you a microphone.
When you started earlier, you said that some photographers stage the images.
Mm-hmm.
They put in models or they put in props or whatever it is. Does it really matter?
You know, I don't know if it matters. I honestly, like I said initially, you know, I have this battle with myself since I started photography. Does it make Mona Lisa more or less of a masterpiece knowing that he put her there looking at him? Yes, maybe for painting and art, the whole idea and execution is a little different to photography. For us, we capture moments, right? In travel photography, you capture what's happening. If you would ask me as a corporate photographer for an advertising campaign or for a fashion project or for a corporate headshot, yes, it does matter. I would say, okay, you need to stage. You need to light properly. You need to stage the model. You need to dress them and prop them. And because ultimately you're creating, I don't want to go so far and say you're creating a piece of art. For fashion photographers, that's probably the case. Corporate headshots, not so much. For advertising photographers, definitely. You're creating an image, right? That image consists of a lot of different elements. For travel photography and street photography, for me, it feels a bit like you're cheating. You're propping something up that you think would look nice, and it often does. But to me, it feels a bit like cheating because it didn't really happen. Again, I'm still a big photographer, a big admirer of photographers that do that for the image that they create. I think for me, it just becomes less of a travel image. It becomes more of an artwork. And that is then your approach. Do you want to capture what happens, or do you want to create pieces of art? Both are perfectly legitimate reasonings.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you take something like a competition, it becomes very difficult to actually distinguish whether it's happened or it's been staged. And very often it's been staged rather than actually.
You're tapping on something really interesting there. So I've been a judge on a few competitions and on a few panels. All awards that I know now usually have a separate category for digital manipulation. So that eliminates the element of digitally manipulating it. Who of you knows the picture of the crow fisher, the boat, lamp, bird? Okay, I don't know how often this poor guy has been photographed. He probably just wanted to go fishing. It's basically an image in China of a long boat, a wooden boat, a fisher with like a very particular dress. There is a cormorant, a bird, long-necked bird that sits on the boat, and sometimes he has a net, and he always has a lamp, a lantern. So the first photographer who shot this probably really took the picture the way it happened, and the 500 photographers after him probably all went up to that poor fisher and said, well, maybe not so poor anymore, made me say, okay, I'll give you $50 if you just wait a minute. Does that make it bad photography? No, it doesn't, because you still have to know what you're doing. Remember that Oscar Wilde quote? Be yourself, everyone else is taken. Does that make it a creative picture? No, because that image has been all over the place. It's a repetition, exactly. It's not a creation, it's a copy. You know, it's a reproduction. And in fine art and in paintings, reproductions are the ones that you find at IKEA and Home Center, you know. That's why a reproduction then costs 19 dirhams. The original oil painting probably cost 19,000 for good reason, because that artist came up with the whole thing, right? But again, you know, no one is holding you and me back from staging it. I just wouldn't submit an image into a competition that's staged, because I would feel I've cheated. But if you're a photographer who does digital manipulation, I've seen amazing submissions with images that like take you in awe. They're masterpieces of their own right, but it's also a different category. So to answer your question in really one line, I feel you do what you feel is right, and if you can go to sleep at night and you're happy with it, then that's okay. You know, I wouldn't care much about what other people think. Is it right or is it not right? What I care about is I don't feel comfortable with staging images for travel photography. Commercial and advertising, different story. All right, I think we finished this Nepal section quickly, and then let me show you two more images, and then we break. So this, again, talking about black and white, like you asked earlier, when do I decide to shoot black and white? This was an experiment of saying, okay, I want to capture the light and shadow play in those places. So that was shot for black and white, and you can see it's very balanced, even though on the screen it's a bit dark here. But one thing, again, that I'm a big fan of when traveling is like capture those moments of what people do. You know, someone's switching up the light for us. Now it's better, eh? Okay, thanks. It's like, what's this? Capture what people do, you know, their day-to-day. So this is Daudanat, one of the most sacred sites for Tibetan Buddhists and Buddhists in Nepal. And it's part of their day-to-day affair of going there. So this capture is really the moment there. You know, you have like a little bit of haze. You can see there's like a lot of smoke from burning incense. There's like those different kind of people. You can see prayer flags and devotionalia. It really captures the spirit of those moments. You know, I remember coming to the UAE the first time, early 2000s, and we went onto this desert safari, and I was like, well, what's so interesting about a desert safari? But then we saw camels, and we saw like the sort of Bedouin culture, even though it was sold to tourists and it was a setup. It sort of gave me a first taste of how the region sort of, from where it came. And then you find more of those places, and you go to Liwa, and you see Bedouin life, how it still happens. You go to Dubai, and you see how people live there. Because let's face it, when you're an expat in Dubai, you live in certain areas, and there might be other areas of town that you don't venture to, right? I love Karama. If you ever look for good Indian food, Karama has some of the most amazing places for really good Indian food. And on the other hand, you have other places like Fujairah, for example. If you want to have fresh fish, you go to Fujairah, and you can literally like grill the catch that comes in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you have it on the barbecue by 11. So those little things. So really try to capture the identity of people and places. What makes it the place it is. And I think we we take a 15-minute break before I go through the rest of you. And maybe you can think of some questions for the next round. everyone back from the tea break. Can you hear me? Hello. So can you hear me? I think you can hear me now, right? Okay. In the last rows as well, you can hear me? Good, perfect. How was the coffee break? Good. Good coffee? Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna fly through the next ones a little quicker to get you to some other places but Nepal. This is one of those moments that I mentioned earlier, the ones where you just have to capture the moment. So this guy is like a Buddhist monk where naive me thought to give up all worldly possessions, everything, of course, everything apart from a mobile phone. You know, you want to keep the friends updated. And this is how it happened, right? This is not staged. This is how it looked. Here you can see again what I mentioned to you earlier, like the shallow depths of field. That's just like an everyday moment, you know. They have something called a puja, which happens in the during the day, and typically before meal, and then they go outside and sit there and eat. Again, that's one of those moments that's just happened. This guy, how it works in Nepal is you have a lot of the monasteries are also the schools for children. A lot of families cannot afford schools for their children, so they send them into monasteries. And in those monasteries, the kids study Buddhism, and they also study their normal curriculum, right? So it's a bit of a benefit for them. And this little guy basically just came out and basically put his clothes back on his cloak. They were playing soccer shortly before, and it was time back for class, so he just gets dressed. And he saw me, and he was just joking around with me because we were sitting, what you don't see is behind me is a wall with a doorway, and me crouching down, I almost fell over, and he had the greatest fun. We played that game for 5 minutes, and then he was gone, and that's the picture I took with. Cropping images. In Nepal, you have people called babas. They're holy men. They give up all their worldly positions. They also don't have mobile phones, and they live off the contributions of the community. They traditionally paint their faces with relation to certain gods and goddesses in that religion, and they wander through the country. They go often from India to the high altitude areas in the Himalayas, go to sacred sites there, and then walk back. And this typical sort of face paint, I thought it would be a nice crop. You know, I printed this exactly the way it is cropped here, and you have like a really long but low height image that looks really nice. So that crop question that was there earlier, you can, with the resolution cameras provide today, you can crop into elements, you can change the entire look of the image, and create a more interesting frame. So this is how they look. This is basically the same guy. This is another image. I mentioned to you that there's no images are retouched. What I do in either Capture One, because I work with Sony cameras, or in Lightroom, I do play with the colors. So what you can see here, don't know if you can see it actually. Yeah, you do. The shadows are a bit more blue, and the highlights are a bit warmer. So you can do that in your Lightroom or Capture One. There's a setting in Capture One, it's called color balance. Who knows what it's called in Lightroom? Anyone? The question is like the adjustment of shadow color and highlight color in Lightroom. Split toning, exactly, thank you. So you can adjust the colors and give it a bit more of a cinematic. Often people refer to it as like a cinematic look because film cameras tend to deliver that kind of feel. Again, that's not editing, that's just adjusting. You know? This is another holy man in Nepal, and this now is basically the Baba in his natural environment. This is in the high altitude Himalayas, where you can see that he's wrapped in a blanket and like a sort of cover. When we were there, it was nights were -10, -12 degrees, and those guys sleep outside. They also don't wear proper winter shoes. They wear what you are wearing, you know, flip-flops. And they walk on those flip-flops hundreds of kilometers through the high altitudes in the Himalayas, where often there is no roads. You've seen now, I love those quotes. A famous Mark Twain quote is, "Travel is fatal to prejudice." We've sort of visited that topic earlier. I feel like all those interactions with different cultures sort of make you realize one thing, that we're all just humans, you know, we all have different environments. This, again, is how the gear looks now, right? You remember that picture I showed you earlier? This is how it looks now. So I've boiled down to one Profoto head. This is what you asked earlier, is that a power bank? This is how it looks from the side. Two bodies. In this, it's an A7S for video and an A7R Mark III for photo. Two lenses mounted, so I can interchange the lenses between the bodies. Sorry? That's a 1635 and an 85. So I have something wide and I have something tele. Well, not tele, but a nice portrait. My little Peli case, a small power bank, batteries. I found that either I have a really bad memory or I don't know, but I found writing down things really helps. So I tend to, if I've taken a picture, if I've taken a few pictures, I tend to write down where it was, what happened, you know, what date, what time of day. And I find later on, often I go back and I'm like, what was that? And you can go through your little book. Those field notes I use, they're like, develop this special paper, so you can throw this thing in water, you can drive a truck over it, it's going to be exactly as it is now. They're really rigid. I travel with a handheld GPS because often where we go there is no maps, so at least I know roughly where north is and which elevation. In case you wonder what this is, it's an emergency beacon, so everywhere in the world, from the Antarctic to the Arctic, if you're in trouble, you can press this little button here and someone will come and rescue you, or not. But I pay my monthly fee, so I hope someone will come. This is a small Profoto softbox, so for portraits, if I want to shoot portraits, funny enough, the last 3 trips I did, I always had it with. I've not shot a single lit portrait. So this is how the bag looks now. In case you wonder if that motorcycle story is really true, it is. That's in Upper Mustang, and you can see this mountain here is 7,450 meters. To give you a relation, Mount Everest is 8828. The highest mountain in the UAE is 1,850 meters, which is Jebel Jais. So this thing is almost 4 times as high as Jebel Jais, and I find Jebel Jais pretty high already. That's, again, Upper Mustang, another motorcycle. There's going to be a few of them. We do 2. You can do both, rent or buy. In this case, we rented them because I can tell you, after you're done with them for 2 weeks, you don't want to own it anymore. You know, the non-existence and absence of roads is not very kind to anything that's moving on this bike. But you also rent them that way, you know, like this bike you can see here. We picked it up in Kathmandu and we had the great idea to drive a distance of 150 kilometers. How much does 150 kilometers take here? Which is roughly from here to Abu Dhabi? 2 hours, right? Okay. Any other guesses? 2 hours is not bad. Without traffic, an hour and a half? Yeah, okay. 150 kilometers in Nepal, 1.5 days. And that's not days of 8 hours. That's days of 12 hours, a little bit of sleep, and another 9 hours. It wasn't a great idea, but it was a great trip. So when we picked up the bike, when we rented them, they were pretty bad condition. When we returned them, I didn't have a gear lever anymore because it had broken off somewhere in the mountains. My brother, who is this, didn't have a brake pedal anymore. Part of his exhaust had fallen off, and you can see this. This is not to tie down the luggage. This is to tie up the rest that was hanging down because it was falling off. So it was a great trip, nevertheless. This guy was quite funny because he's one of our friends, my brother's close friend. And when we left for the trip, and when we came to Kathmandu and we picked up the bikes, and Nico, that's his name, Nico turned around to us saying, guys, I got to admit something to you. I've never driven a bike. And my brother and I knew the road conditions, or that there was no road. And we were like, this is not going to end well. And at some point during the trip, when we got there, we took the wrong junction of what is like a little gravel pass. And it took us 4.5 hours to go through a completely pitch black forest and arriving at this makeshift hotel. And we arrived middle of the night, and the guy was like, the receptionist or the guy who owned it was like, where are you guys coming from? We're like, well, we came through this forest. That was the only route we had. And he shaked his head. Nico had a puncture on the last 2-3 kilometers, and we had to push the bike through the forest. And he shook his head saying, you guys are so lucky. And we're like, why? Well, because that forest has the highest population of mountain leopards in Nepal. And we were like, okay. Well, we all came back in one piece. The bikes didn't, but we did. So we're moving from, I'm just going to show you a few quick images. This is how it looks. That's a bridge put together out of steel rope and a few wooden panels. Say it again? Well, you know what? Funny enough, we all fell at some point. Nico had a puncture tire, and that was it. He did the entire trip without a single blue mark. And we had water crossings. You ride around mountain faces like this. He was doing perfectly fine. And he did do his bike license shortly after. That's what I was talking about in terms of the scope of stuff you have to capture when traveling. So I could have done this a lot better, no question about it. I could have used filters. I could have used a better tripod. I could have maybe used a better setup. I could have waited for the right time of the day. But this is something that really happened. We came through there and we saw this. The reason why those areas are green is because when the snow melts, all the water runs down the face and collects in this basin. So this is highly salty soil that gets washed away with all the gravel. And this is highly fertile soil where they grow their crops, you know, and it looked just so pretty. So you will have to, when traveling, especially when traveling this remote, you will have to compromise. Because, sorry, you might not have filters. This is how it looks up there. That's glacier water. That's the picture you saw earlier. Again, I could have done so much different here with like an ND filter, you know, and getting the cloud movement. But still, you can wait for moments like this where you have cloud cover and you have light on this village here. It's called Muktinat, and you have sun rays like just hitting the ground. You just have those little lights, and it makes the image so much more interesting. So on the bike, it's also a bit easier because you get to areas where you can't go with a car or with a tour operator because they would be too afraid you're falling off the mountain. So I was talking about filters. One filter that I do always carry, though, because it's small, is a circular polarizer. So you might have seen that the skies in those images before were very blue, right? Circular polarizers, you get them for different length diameters. They're round filters, and they're basically two pieces of filter, and you turn them against each other, and you polarize your lens. So blues look more blue. Without a polarizer, that's another benefit of it. This is how water looks. With a polarizer, you can turn it in a way that it becomes transparent. So polarizing filters are used by automotive photographers, for example, to get rid of the reflections in the windows. Whenever you have glass, but one benefit is also that maybe you've seen this with polarizing sunglasses, that they make the image and the sky pop a lot more. The other, see, here's a good example. So this is how it looks without the polarizer, and this looks how it looks with the polarizer. And that's an accessory that's really worth it because it's small, it mounts in front of your lens. The only thing you have to be aware of is that you will lose a little bit of light. So you might have to compensate for a stop or a stop and a half that you lose. So that's why here you can see the sky really pops and really separates nicely, and it just adds this additional layer of structure to the shot. This is what happens when you use a circular polarizer and you turn it in a way that you have the sky really nice and blue. You can even see it vignettes a little here, and the rest is dark. But what I wanted with that image was something else. What I wanted with that image is that. And in case you're wondering, this is a crop of this image. So it's the same image. That's one benefit of modern technology, and like the Sony, for example, provides me with 42 megapixel of image data, shot in RAW. This is printable. In terms of megabytes, or in terms of megabytes, this is probably now somewhere around the 30s. After the crop, it's probably going to be 18. I can tell you later exactly. But you can print this on an 80 by 1 meter canvas without any problem. And it's a crop of this exact same image. And you can see the details of it. You can recognize the snow. Again, this is the benefit of picking your right gear, right? Have the right camera body that provides you with the widest spectrum of possibilities. Combine it with a lens that provides it with the widest spectrum of possibilities, and you can do stuff like that. Please. I'm too lazy to do blending, I think. No, I do blending, but not so much for travel shots, simply because if I travel without a tripod, blending is really difficult. What I tend to do is I try to bracket. So bracketing, who knows what bracketing is? So bracketing is several shots where the center shot is ideally exposed, and then your camera says, okay, I do one stop under, one stop over, and so you have 3 images where in one image it's average metering is exposed properly. Then you have one that's under, so the brighter areas are now properly exposed. And then you have one that's one stop over, where now the darker areas are brighter exposed. And when you combine them, digital blending, you can do both. Like you have some cameras on the market that combine bracketed shots, or you can do it manually. And then when you combine them, which is called blending or digital blending, you basically benefit from correctly exposed highlights and brighter areas, correctly exposed shadows, and a middle that's properly exposed. I do bracket sometimes just for having them in the back, but I almost always when I travel end up using a shot and accepting the fact that it might be a little over or under in certain areas. Another round of 101 of travel photography. So one thing that I find is that the mobile that we anyways carry, you have so much apps that are so cool. Like Sunseeker is one of them. You know, who knows Sunseeker, the app? Yeah, you can literally stand there, and it's augmented reality. So it switches on your camera, and then you look into the sky, and you see exactly where the sun is at what time. So you can figure out, if you have this valley, you can figure out when is the sun where and plan your shot. As far as I know, it's even free, you know, which is great. Wonderground is a weather app that gives you not only temperature, but it gives you temperature, humidity, wind. It gives you a forecast on how the next couple of days is going to be, and it gives you a timeline. What temperature over the day, and when likely rain is going to happen. Moon calendar sounds like a funny app to have, but if you want to do anything like star trails, anything that your light pollution has to be at the lowest, great app to have. You know exactly when to sleep in because it's full moon, and when to go out because it's no moon. You ask for it being a power bank. One of the, probably my biggest favorite thing with the camera I use is that I can charge it with a power bank. It has a micro USB. I plug that into the camera, plug the other end into a power bank, and I do not have to struggle with carrying around 15 chargers and 20 cables and 4 sets of batteries. So I can charge off the power bank. So a question for traveling is always, do you have access to main power? Is there anything that you want to take with? Like what we did, for example, in the last trip is we had 2 power banks. We constantly charged one when we were out of the house because from 5 o'clock onwards, they had power cuts. So there was, when we came back home, there was no power till the next morning at 9. So that's one thing that you can do. Then solar chargers are a great option today. You know, you can put them on the bike. You can put them. There's even some you can put on the backpack. They fold down, and they charge your phone. They charge your camera. They charge a set of batteries. They have an insane amount of power. Those little things, and they're really helpful. One thing that I tend to do is you know, the Ziploc bags that you and I use for freezing food. They're great little bags to have in the bag for 2 things. A cleaning cloth for the lens, so a microfiber, Ziploc, it's airtight, no sand, good thing to do, but also for batteries. I do have dry bags, like little diving dry bags that you can take even underwater, but those Ziploc bags are really nice. And then a very unpopular topic with a lot of photographers is data management. What do? You know, you come back from this great day outside. It's been good fun. And you have so many shots, but they're all on your one SD card. So what happens if that SD card fails, you know? What happens if you accidentally put it next to electronic devices? You know, SD cards and hard drives do fail. The question is not if they fail, the question is when did they fail? And they always fail when you least need it. So I usually carry 2 hard drives. I come home or come to the camp or wherever, put in the SD card, copy it to one hard drive, copy it over to the second one, and then you have 2 backups. And I tend to not format my cards except when they're full. I copy down the data, but I keep the data on them, except like when they're full and I need a fresh one. But it's something that a lot of photographers sort of not think of, and then when the data is gone, then you're going to have a really annoying week, trust me. So you might as well think of this before. Oh, that's the same slide twice. So this is how it looks sometimes. This is what I mentioned to you earlier. It's called a steady bag. We've just passed that point already. Here we go. So this is called a steady back. It basically, do you know beanbags? Okay, so it's basically a photographer's beanbag. It's roughly this big, and it's very squishy, and you can put it on anything. It's filled with a very similar stuff to the beanbag, and you can put it, let's say, on a rock. You can put it on a fence. You can put it on a between a tree, you know. And because of the stuff inside, once you put your camera in, it sits rock solid. It's good enough to do long exposures, star trails, whatever you want to do with it. It sits rock solid. I find it sits better than on a tripod because it wraps around your camera body and it really sits solid. It takes away all the vibration because of those little thingies in there. And they're super affordable. You get them here as well. And the best thing for me is they're only this big. They don't stick off my backpack. I don't have to put it anywhere with a tripod head. And you'd be surprised how creative you can get with this little thing to get it at the angle you want it at. So for me, really a very, very cool accessory to take with. We've been there already, so this is sort of a charging setup. I'm going to skip that. Another big question that I'm always been asked is how do I carry all that stuff? Oops. How do I carry all that stuff? And I personally love hard cases like those. They're water and airtight. You can chuck all your gear in. The one I have comes with like a handle and wheel, so I can lazily drag it along. Other people love backpacks and put their stuff in there. What I've found is I trust those a little more because they're army military grade material, so you can really kick those things around and you can stand on top of them and they're still going to be okay. And they're watertight. I had a case falling into the creek full of camera gear and nothing happened. You take it out and it's fine. You open it and it's clean and not wet. I wouldn't have had the same luck with a backpack, but that's personal preference. So not to bore you too long with that 101 on travel photography, one country that I've recently been to is Uzbekistan. Who of you knows where it is? Okay, have you been? Okay. There's one person who knows where it is? Oh yeah, there's more. Good. I was shocked here for a moment. So one thing that's special about Uzbekistan is the Silk Route. Okay, so the Silk Route is one of the oldest trading routes and stretched all the way from China into continental Europe. Right? It has a really rich tradition of multiple cultures, of multiple religions, and architecturally, it's absolutely stunning. You might have heard of cities called Samarkand, Bukhara, or Hiva. They're sort of, they used to be the capitals at the time. And one thing the Silk Road did is because you had traders going from China to continental Europe, there was a lot of goods, but there was something else that was traveling with those people, and that was knowledge. So every city along the Silk Road, the bigger cities, compiled an incredible amount of knowledge, whether it was medicine, math, physics, architecture, engineering. So that was one reason why those cities have those, for the time, big buildings. They have traditional icons like this guy who stands around everywhere with like the typical bread loaf and big smiling, big belly, big cheeks, you know, a lot of bread. So much about carbohydrates and being good for you. And you come across like really interesting scenes. One thing is that they've used those tiles with the blue color, which also is the result of the Silk Road trading, because this blue color was coming in through the route with the traders, and they created those patterns that you find all over. And this was just a scene where I thought, you know, this is too funny not to photograph, because he does a very good job at blending in for the afternoon nap. again, to go back to your question, did I ask her and wake her up for a model release? No, I admit I didn't. But I'm not going to print it in a photo book, I promise. Hmm? No, exactly. She might have a copyright on the fabric pattern. Again, here you can see I used the polarizer. That's why the surrounding area is dark, and I was able to correctly expose this. Another thing I did is, who of you knows what keys? Go ahead. Hoya. Hoya. Just a normal circular polarizer. Who of you knows what Keystone is? Keystone? No? Okay. So one problem you run into when carrying only 2 or 3 lenses is that this is too big for an 85. You don't have enough space for a 7200. So you will have to go to the wide angle you have, right? 1635. And there's another lens called a tilt shift, which allows you to be relatively wide, so you're distorting, but you can correct the angles with the tilt shift elements on the lens. This is a shot of a 1635 Sony lens, and in order to make the line somewhat straight, you can use something called Keystone. It's available in Lightroom, it's available in Capture One. So what you do is you basically tell the software that this is your straight lines, right? And then the software will go and calculate it accordingly and straighten it for you. That's called Keystone. The only thing you need, try it when you have an image that you can try it with. The only thing you need is 2 straight lines for the verticals, and you need 2 lines for the horizontals. The trained eye, you will see it's not perfectly straight, but otherwise it would be bending the other way because it was too big for me to capture any other way. Another way of showing the grandeur of like architecture, if you're not an architectural photographer or have ample of time to wait for the right moment, is to find interesting angles, and the bird and the frog perspective, I reckon. So the frog is the perspective from the ground outwards. So for the frog, everything looks big, right? Because he looks at it from down there, looks outwards, everything is big. For the eagle, or the bird, everything looks tiny. Because you're up there, we are down here, we're like this big for the bird, So you can use the same sort of same sort of principle. If no one really, come on, one, okay. And you're a guy, you're the last person to do this. It's usually the girls that go, oh, I want to look slimmer. But that's exactly why you do it. You choose that angle because top down, things look smaller, right? Bottom up, things look bigger. So if you have big guys like me and you, we want to be photographed from a slightly outward angle because we look slimmer. If you have tiny people that want to look bigger, and I'm not joking, this is what happens. You shoot corporate profiles, and the guy's like, can you please, easy trick, you just give it a bit of an angle from the top. And you have guys that are smaller people, that's just how they are, and you can give it a bit of a notch from the bottom up, and they look a bit bigger. So it's super simple little tricks that make things work. Same for here, you just give it an upward angle, and this looks bigger and grander immediately. It's a bit of a crappy crop, I see, because there's a light bulb here. Another thing is, when you travel to places, try to pick up on those patterns that they use, on decorations, on wood carvings. Just this as an image might not make any sense, but if you want to, for example, do a photo book of your trip, let's say you take the family, you want to do a photo book and share your trip, those things come in handy as fillers, like as a background image in the photo book before you put the other images on top. You had the question of black and white. When do I decide if, there you are, when do I decide if it's black and white? So I've shot this. I kind of like the shot. I like that there's a person here. It looked nice. And then I looked at it thinking, okay, how would it look in black and white? I can't tell you. I don't know. We can vote if you want. So who thinks, hands up, who thinks this looks better? Okay, now I have to count. 2, 4, 6, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 25. Okay, I think 25 roughly can. Who thinks this looks better? All right, that's clearly the color one wins. I don't know. I still can't decide. But it shows you that the benefit of digital photography and having a camera that has a nice dynamic range and that repeats details properly is that you can play around with it, right? I mean, the quality of the image is equally good in black and white. And then it's up to you what you feel comfortable with and what you think looks best. This is another image that looks a lot better on screen, I must say, but there's a very famous image by a digital artist, photographer called Andreas Gursky. Who knows it? Ryan 2. It's the highest sold photograph in the world. It made 4.2 million US dollars, if I'm not mistaken, on the last auction, which is basically the River Rhine with a green marsh. That's it. I tried. If anyone is there that wants to give me 2.5 for it, I'm willing to sell. So, you know, but what I liked about it, I didn't try to replicate it, but it struck me that it looked quite nice with those straight lines, the green marshes, then there's like another wetland here, then you have the straight horizon line and then the mountains. It kind of looked nice, you know. Would I put that into an exhibition? Probably not. It's also very unlikely that anyone wants to buy it at an auction, but I liked the composition of it, and that's what mattered for me. Again, another architecture piece. We saw this from the other side earlier, but I liked that the mosque dome, the shadow fell onto the sidewall. So that's a cool shot to take. Again, I did Keystone here. That's why the lines are very straight. With those angled shots, you have to be a bit careful because the software now thinks this is straight, but you're at an angle. So it's a bit of a tricky one. You better do that manually. And then you get those moments where you just walk and lose yourself in the city and you happen to have the sun right at the back and you happen to have that guy there that has like a nice rim light and that walks down there with his bag, and it just looks nice. And that's what I meant with being ready. This is probably 5.6 at 160 or 200. It was literally looking. I saw the guy coming down, put the camera up, snuck onto like a position that was stable, and took the shot. If you then have to fiddle around with your camera and find the right settings, that is it. The guy has passed you. He's home. By the time you're ready to shoot, he's already having dinner. Yes. Can you? I can't hear you, unfortunately, but.
Hello?
Perfect. Here we go.
Hi.
Hello.
Actually, I looked at your Instagram page, and this is one of my favorite pictures.
Thank you.
To do this in, have you tried it in black and white?
I haven't, because I think this would probably be a little underexposed, but
Okay.
We could quickly do it in black and white. You want to see how it looks in black and white? Anyone interested? Okay, we'll take a second to get this up and running. This is going to be tricky now. So, you want to tell me what black and white is? Okay, one down. That was color balance. This is going to be tricky. Okay, I think this is a bit easier. Okay, so here we go. So, like if you convert it to black and white, what you can do is you can adjust your channels, which still apply even if you're converting an image into black and white. So you can still play around with your channels. You're going to see like certain areas that are cyan, for example, that even react on the conversion. Your red, for example, if you dial that down, you can see how the shadows change. So I'm trying to get this somewhere reasonable nice. So this would be, right, let me give you a full screen of this. Can you see the image? Yeah, right? So this is black and white. Let me zoom out a bit. Everyone see now? Okay. So this is black and white. That's not a, I promise I see, on my screen it looks different than there, but okay. This is color, this is black and white. So you want to vote who likes black and white better? Let's do that again. Black and white? Hands up who likes black and white. This one? That's very limited response. And that's color. Color is better. Okay, so I'm really glad I put a color image one on. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Good question though. I hope it answered it. Did it? Okay, cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you tell us about your last trip in Uzbekistan? Any tips or insights?
Any tips or insights? Of course. Travel hungry, because food in this country is ridiculously good. And I'm not joking, there's so much cooking happening outside and in areas of, you have restaurants, there's this dish called plov, which is done in massive pans with like raisins and rice and meat. They have bazaars, which are not only trading places for like goods, but also like big eateries. So you have like shashlik, you have kebab, you have like all those different dishes, which just looks cool because it's all cooked over fire, or it like they have those little dumplings that are like put together and they're on big steam trays. Like it's really cool. The other thing is I would try to travel the Silk Road. So I would try to do Hiva, Bukhara, and Samarkand, the three main cities. My least favorite is Samarkand because it's too big and doesn't have that character that I was looking for. I was very lucky and had someone to show me around that is from there. I would probably think Hiva and Bukhara are the places that offer the best to photographers, because they're almost like you step through the gate and it's like you travel back in time. People look the way they look. The architecture is still like how it used to be, you know, and it's not that many tourists. There's not that many tourists anyway, so if you want to go now, because it's opening up now and it has more and more tourists. right? So I would suggest to visit Tashkent as well, the capital city. Beautiful buildings, really nice spots to hang out and look at the city. But yeah, definitely for me, like the ideal itinerary, if you would ask me, would be 10 days out of where you do the first 2 days in Tashkent, then you do the Silk Route, and then you come back to Tashkent, finish off with a nice day chilling there, and then fly back out. You also don't have to be worried about which airline you use and how cheap the tickets are because there's only one airline flying. So, you know, makes choosing so much easier. And other than that, yeah, that's what I would do. What's really cool is that you don't actually have to drive if you don't like driving, because you rent a driver in a car for next to nothing to drive from Tashkent to, they probably drive you to the end of the world for $15. And again, you're like in touch with the local community. They give you a lot of inputs and insights. There's some really nice art galleries. Uzbekistan has a very rich art culture of painters and you have sculptures. There's a big bohemian society. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to see. Any other questions? Brett? Let me get you a mic.
About the model release. So when you see the opportunities for making it commercial, when you approach people, they just sign it for you for free, or they expect any compensation, or do you offer them to email pictures or something?
Excellent question. There's like a few slides after this. You're going to see how it works in Africa. Generally, they don't ask for money. As far as my experience, generally they're okay with it. It's a little different when you rock up with a whole crew of people with lights and generators and film cameras. Then they tend to be a little less relaxed. But and then they see, okay, there's a commercial enterprise behind it. Why wouldn't they pay, right? But if it's, and we're purely talking travel and street photography. We're not talking about using them as models in a campaign with the aim of doing a campaign. Then they should be paid because they become an essential part of that endeavor and they become models. But I never had anyone asking to pay, apart from Ethiopia, where you're going to see what happened there. Usually they just sign. As long as you explain what it is for. So the question is, do I shoot manual or do I go for other modes? I'd say mostly my camera is set to manual just because it gives me more creative freedom. There is certain times where I shoot aperture priority, and there's certain times where I shoot shutter priority. So aperture priority, for me, only in situations where I want less flexibility, or need less flexibility on movement. Shutter priority in scenes that are moving faster. So if I have groups of people where there's a lot of movement, different movement, so fast, slow, then I would shoot shutter priority. But mostly manual, just because it gives me the creative freedom when I want it and the way I want it. But again, that's personal preference. Plus, I think I've learned it the old way. So I've learned photography the old way. I just don't trust auto modes, which is not right. I know that because nowadays cameras, auto modes are so good. When you look at continuous focus modes on cameras now, they're faster than you would ever be able to focus over the ring. They take so many different things into consideration. Which direction does the subject move? How fast? They track. You know, Sony has a great mode for tracking the subject. You can move around the room, and it will keep it in focus all the time. Things like the IAF, which focuses on what the computer in the camera recognizes as an eye, and it just stays on there. It just keeps it in focus. For me to do that manually is hard work. So yeah, I think probably auto would work as good or better, but I just feel more comfortable with the manual mode. Any other questions for now? Here you go. Good. I love you guys having so many questions. That's cool.
When I'm traveling, my always concern is about safety. So when you're traveling between cities in the middle of nowhere and you're holding expensive gear, how do you deal with this?
I don't. So the first thing is my gear is insured, which takes a lot of headache off traveling. I've ended up in some really dodgy places, I can tell you. And I've ended up in some really dodgy situations as well. For some reason, I think it's all about how you appear. You know, if you're the big show-off carrying 2 plastic cases and a sign with the camera manufacturer dangling over your head with 2 arrows pointing here, then obviously someone is going to rob you. You know, but if you're just nice and easy and down to earth, I've never had an issue. And I forgot backpacks and cases with gear at places where you shouldn't forget your gear. But I think a big part of it is really the insurance. So I know even if I lose all my gear, it's insured. At least I'm not losing money. It makes it easier to think about.
Yeah, but our look is mostly different when we're visiting other places. And losing gear is not a problem. Losing life is the problem.
I honestly can't. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've been we traveled to Ethiopia at a time where very, very few people traveled there, and that's probably the only time that we got into trouble because we got shot at by someone who misunderstood the shutter sound as something else. Apart from that, nothing ever happened. So I can't answer that because I've never had that issue. But I think one big point is really old T-shirt, old pants, an old pair of shoes, no jewelry, and a fancy camera, exactly. But at least the fancy camera, you know, no one knows. The thing is, you have to think, a fancy camera you can only sell in a city. If you travel to remote places, they don't know about it, and jewelry, watches, earrings, stuff like that, and expensive clothes. You underestimate how keen someone that lives in the middle of nowhere is to wear a pair of Levi's jeans. You know, he probably takes your Levi's over the camera because no use for him. So I really can't, I never had that issue. But yeah, old T-shirt, old shoes, old pair of jeans, and not flashing your $500 notes around. That always worked for me. And a big smile, you know, you can diffuse a lot of situations with just a big smile. How I carry my cash, I can't tell you, unfortunately. I carry credit card. No, seriously, I do have something that I learned wearing when my granddad told me this is where you put documents, which is a neck pouch that I carry under a shirt so you don't see it. And I usually carry cash in really interesting places that I don't want to get into. Take it out when you take them off. So I try to like sort of spread it around a little, and I always have cards. So at least if you get to a bigger city, you can withdraw, but I try to spread around my cash a bit. Yeah, please.
I wanted to ask, is there anyone like sponsoring your trips? Are you working for magazines like Nat Geo, or like how are you selling your pictures?
Some trips are sponsored. Most of the work that you see, except actually all of the work that you see now today is paid out of my own pocket, and then you sell the images, I sell the images later. So you're going to see a few images here that were published in Nat Geo, and then you get paid, but trust me, you will not be able to pay your rent of one image. So what I tend to do is like you offer the images either as a body of work for a story, which you would require to have like at least a copywriter or a journalist with you. or they're just images that naturally sell for travel organizations or for destination management companies that use the images to promote. And there's other trips where I'm working on assignment, where I'm getting paid to photograph. So I'm doing a big trip in 15 days, where we're traveling through 5 countries in Africa. And that trip, I'm working on assignment for a wildlife organization that pays me for photographing their territory and their wildlife protection endeavors.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who knows what that is? It's not a horse. So I thought we'd do a quick tour back from Nepal on our way to Africa through. Hope we have enough time. I think we have a few more minutes. So this thing is right behind us. Who has seen? Probably one of you has seen that image before. So that's during. See, I said one of you. Exactly. So it's Burj Khalifa during the fog a couple of years ago. It's funny, when I step on the floor, the picture goes away. So no dancing today. I think I found the spot. So this picture you can't take. I mean, now you're going to start dancing. This picture you can't take anymore because now there's structure in front of it. And that's one of those moments, you know. So at the time I had a lot of gear. I went up this high-riser, took the picture, great picture. I took a picture of my phone because I liked the scene, and still have that picture. And it looked amazing, you know. It just looked right. It was at the right balance of exposure, and you saw the fog. I tried for hours to get to the same result of my phone image. I couldn't. This is luckily of a proper camera, and was published in Nat Geo and around the world, and also was published in a UK newspaper on a double-page spread. And if you ask why do I shoot pictures, because that's one of those moments. You get the copy of that newspaper. You agree? You get one of those newspapers and you fold it open, and your picture takes tens of thousands of dollars advertising space because some photo editor thought this is too good not to be published. And you have a newspaper like this size, double spread, that's worth every reward for getting up at 3 in the morning. Yeah. And whoever says they don't pay you for your work, I don't think it's fair. And even if it's just a tiny amount, it's not about making millions of an image. It's about appreciating your work as a photographer. So do not ever give your images away for free, because I've checked with DIWA, and exposure does not pay your DIWA bills. And you get like, you get so many people saying, oh yeah, but you get great exposure. Can you give us your image? No, because I have to pay power and water. But it might be different if you do it as a hobby and you want to see yourself published, by all means. I earn my living with this, so I just can't give them away for free. That's a bit like, you know, that's a bit like asking Paul Bocuse for his secret ingredient for this onion soup he does. No. And plus, Dubai is very restrictive, rightly so, to those locations, because they often have safety issues and they protect the people, rightly so. So you need special permits, you need access permits, and I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing those locations because they're also, you know, part of a bigger scope of work. Anyone else? Okay, so, well, that's one. That's another one that you can't take anymore because there's buildings now. And this is really how it looks. I'm still awestruck every time I see it because who of you has seen snow? I know it's a silly question, but a lot of people haven't. You know this moment when snow falls and everything is like dampened and quiet, and it's like those winter mornings? This is exactly how it is. For some reason, the entire city turns into this silent, magical surreality of. Are you looking for a job as a copywriter? Because I would need someone to write my undertitles. Magical surreality, you know, it's absolutely amazing. You sit on top and you see the city. You know the city from driving down Sheikh Zayed Road, and this is just stunning. The time of this is probably I can look at the exif, but it's probably I think 6 in the morning. It's slightly higher exposed than the original looks, but not much. Probably 6, 7 in the morning. Yeah. No, it's not. No, it's not. Any other questions? No, it's actually from a rooftop. There's only one tower, not a rooftop, that's not correct. It's from a terrace, but since there's only one tower that you can't see, guess from where it's shot. So, exactly. But you know, it shows you the sort of scale of the city we live in. And one thing I like about this big picture is that you see Sir Norman Foster's Index Tower, which is like an architectural icon. You see all those different architectural features on buildings. Big Ben, you see Emirates Towers, the Etisalat building, you see Sheikh Rashid Tower, the first high-riser that was ever built on Sheikh Zayed Road. So you look at it and you can kind of relate to it, and it's just an interesting picture for me. Now, I was talking about lighting and staging. So I'm going to show you a few pictures that are staged. They're part of a body of work that I'm trying to put together, which is the working people in the Emirates. So there's one that's for Dara. This guy basically owns a bicycle, drives around delivering stuff between the different boats at the port. And this guy is, you know, I just had to photograph him. The glasses, the cap, that cleaver, and the look. It was like, okay, well, I'm not sure. What are we having? Because he just had this serious look. And I didn't have to do anything. Like, this is just how he looked. Lighting it with one light was quite nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, what? He was a really nice guy, though. This is, I'm not sure if you remember, I mentioned Saeed earlier, the fisherman that we met in Fujairah. That's him. He's probably mid-70s, and he used to go out at sea, and he can't anymore. His son doesn't let him because he thinks he needs to rest. And Saeed sits on top of where all those old cars are stored that they used to roll in the nets, and he looks over the ocean. You know, that's his day. And he was really happy that we showed up there. In case, ladies, you're looking for a new nail polish, Saeed might be a good resource of information. But if you look at this face and those, you know, he had massive hands. I mean, look at the size of his hands, and they're not distorted. That was his hands, like the hard work he has done over his lifetime. The wrinkles in his face, you know. And then you have so that was staged images, and you can see I had like 4 in like a whole deck of images. They look nice as a body of work for a particular project, but for travel, they're just not my thing. I just don't like staging. To answer your question. But then, you know, we all think, oh, we have to travel places. We have to like travel to photograph. We have to be somewhere. Like It's not true. There's so much stuff happening right outside our door. It takes you to Al Marmoon, the camel racetrack in Dubai. From here, it takes you 20 minutes on a Friday. During winter season, every Friday there is races. Who has been to Al Marmoon? Okay, 4, 5. Okay, that's 5 people, 6, 7, 8, out of all of us, you know. It's right there, and everyone is super happy to welcome you there, you know. They appreciate you being part of their culture and learning about it. It's really cool. So you have those must starts of the camels. They use those robots. On the side here, you have the owners of the camels driving alongside the camels, controlling the robots and cheering. And it's a really cool atmosphere. You have all the camel farms that are close by. If you're nice and ask, hey, can we take pictures? I've never heard a no. This is, we just spoke about this during the break. This is Ras Al Khor Wildlife Sanctuary that Sheikh Rashid, Sheikh Mohammed's father, started, and His Highness keeps it for the birds. There's a development around that side called Dubai Creek Harbor, but the wildlife sanctuary will stay that way. It will stay a sanctuary. So you can go there. There's 2 bird spotting points. There's the lagoon, there is the skyline, and I've not touched this image. Now, just to prove a point, what do you think this is shot on? What camera do you think this is photographed on? Film, big digital camera, medium format? Mobile phone, anyone else? Good spot, that's why I left it. It is an iPhone. This thing is, yeah, this thing is typical for the plastic lens. But just to prove a point, you know, I love, yeah, flare, I love all the camera gear I have dearly, and I love shooting with it and have the creative freedom to play with it. But this is shot of an iPhone that I had in my pocket because we were there for having a coffee and it just happened and it just looked so beautiful. You can, no, you don't. There's 2 bird watching points on both sides. When you drive Al Khail Road or Ras Al Khor Road, you can drive off. There's a parking and you can walk down. There's a normal parking. And then on the other hand, when you drive around, there's another parking towards Alain. There's another parking that you can walk down. There's like a little hut, so you have shade, and there's a lot of photographers there doing wildlife photography. And it's a really nice viewpoint. So giving you some location tips in Dubai that are not rooftops, and that's definitely one. One thing that if you want to experience Bedouin culture, and if you want to experience the culture in the UAE, that I can strongly recommend you is the Al Dafra Camel Festival in Liwa. It happens every year in December. For some reason, it's very poorly advertised. It's in Liwa, not too far from Madinat Zayed, probably 4 hours drive from here. So you have 3 choices of hotels there. It's absolutely incredible. It has the highest priced camel beauty contest in the GCC. It has a falconry competition, camel milking, traditional crafts. There's like a whole lot of things happening there. It's the whole December and typically finishes 25th. So that's definitely one thing to see. And everyone, because it's so rarely visited, everyone is super welcoming. The first time we went, I did not manage to see more than 2 tents because every tent we passed by, we had to sit down, drink, eat, watch dancing, talk to people, and then we were allowed to go. And I kid you not, they literally dragged us into the tent because we could not leave, because that's hospitality for them. It's really, really worth the trip. So, and you get people like him who travel by foot to bring camels over from areas in Pakistan and Balochistan to participate in this festival and to auction off the animals. And I just did like a very simple thing. I used the fencing cover as a background. You know, so just be creative. You know, you get those faces where you're like, they're just so strong and so much fun to look at and to experience what they do. This guy is selling those sticks that I always forget the name of, for dancing and for having well-decorated camels, and behind him is the judging of the camels. Just really quick is filters. You know, you get, because we saw that sunset shot earlier, and you ask if it has multiple exposures. With filters, you can manage to do longer exposures and flatten down water. So you make it like you create motion, a motion effect on the water, or on mountains, it's clouds. You know, just to give you an idea on how this looks. Is like this is, for example, this is, for example, done with a filter. So you get, because your sky would be overexposed, right? So you get longer exposures, and you have subjects moving like clouds. So you can create those really interesting effects of motion blur ultimately, but it creates a more dynamic, more interesting image. Same thing, instead of having the water ripple, you create like a flat mirror surface, which looks like this. And again, this is not retouched, you know, this is, you can see it's slightly overexposed because I didn't want a digital blend, but it's the color split toning or color balance in Capture One is adjusted, but this is how it looks with a filter on top. Any more questions? None? Okay, do you want to do do we have time for a really quick run through the Oman? I can do it in 2 minutes. Okay, let's quickly run through Oman. So this is what I used to go around the GCC with. The road was down Shams, yeah, exactly. You get those, you know, interesting scenes that again just happen. I'm gonna go through it in the 2 minutes. This is Salalah. You can see how like how the whole dress changes, how the whole style changes. This is down in the south of Oman, called the Sugar Dunes, where they have white dunes. Unfortunately, when we were there, it wasn't white. Who knows what that is? Then frankincense, exactly. So where Salalah still exports some of the best frankincense in the world. So a really, really good place. And you know, even here, take those close-ups and use them. Like I use them. What is this? Or use them as background for books or as a print on the wall. You know, you never know. Like, try to find those interesting frames. Part of the same sort of body of work, jobs in the GCC. This trader had a shop in Al Mutra Souk in Muscat, and you have all those potions and lotions and all those beauty products. And I'm sure this guy has no obsessive compulsive disorder, but there's like a lot of stuff in his store, but you can probably get that one screw that you've been looking for that no one has. He has it. And the funny bit is he would know exactly where it is. He was a bit tired after the market. That's Niswa in Oman. Also a great place to go if you go towards Jebel Shams. Stop in Niswa and stop there on Fridays, which is when this is taken. Friday is the goat market in Niswa. Absolute mayhem. People come to the hundreds to sell their goats. Great experience. Like everyone is cheering and in a good mood, but it only happens Friday mornings really early. And then you can stop at the grill, which, you know, I just found funny because it's in the middle of nowhere, this orange painted structure with the grill. There's absolutely no English signboard in the entire town apart from the grill. That's the grill, by the way, in case you're wondering. All right? So We leave the grill on there. That was 2 minutes. That was 2 minutes, wasn't it? Good. Thank you very much for your questions. It's been a... Thanks to the HIPAA team for having me, and to Sonia, of course.
Yes, thank you very much.
been an
And
honor
thank you
speaking
for
to you.
not letting us missing Oman.
No, no.
Thank you everyone for coming today. A big thank for you as well to make our evening beautiful. Would you mind if we go outside to take the group photo? Yeah, thank you very much.
Take the group photo. Namaste. Oh yeah. I know. I've spotted you. Where are you from?
Actually, from Annapurna's other side of Nepal.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Yes, I'm on my. See, Nepal conversations. I can never not participate.